Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome back. It is exactly 9:37 a.m. And this, of course, is News and Views on Salam Media. We are now going to be talking with NUMSA spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, and we are looking at the situation regarding Cyril Ramaphosa's disastrous and destructive path as far as the ANC and the country is concerned. Except for people who willfully and blindly follow the ANC and Cyril Ramaphosa, the majority of people are suggesting that South Africa has entered a winter of despair and discontent. A very good morning to you, Phakamile. Welcome to the program. Do you share those views regarding Cyril Ramaphosa being on this disastrous path of destruction as far as the country is concerned?
Good morning, and good morning to your viewers on Salam Media. Thank you so much for inviting us onto your show. As NUMSA, we certainly support the sentiments that were expressed by Professor Sipho Siepe in that op-ed that he wrote for IOL, where he was basically breaking down how when you analyze the administration of Cyril Ramaphosa, the current ANC president and also the president of the country, he's basically saying that as a country, we're on a downward trajectory, things are getting worse. And from our perspective as a trade union, we can certainly say the same. Where we would extend or expand on what Professor Sipho Siepe is saying is that as NUMSA, we would say that things are getting worse, not just because it's Ramaphosa, but because it is this ANC government which is driving a neoliberal agenda, and that this neoliberal agenda has intensified under the leadership of President Ramaphosa, where we've seen a very, very direct attack on workers and their benefits. We've certainly seen this in state-owned entities where we operate as a trade union, where we've seen massive job losses as government racks up or intensifies its privatization program. And if anybody has been following history over the last 20, 30 years, you will know that once you privatize state utilities like Eskom, that provides energy to the country, like they've done with SAA, the impact of privatization of state utilities is that on ordinary people, on ordinary communities, on the working class and the poor, it means that those facilities become more expensive. It means that there is less access and more suffering. So we certainly do believe that this president has gone very far in intensifying and consolidating the power of capital against the interests of the working class and the poor.
So, Phakamile, let's look at the situation around Cyril Ramaphosa's supposed destructive path. You talk about privatization, and perhaps one of the reasons why, the whole issue around privatization is simply because of the looting and the broken structure that he inherited from Zuma, the state capture issues, and a whole host more. Surely that plays a role as well. We can't put all of this on Cyril Ramaphosa's head.
I think the mistake we must not make, and we must not allow ourselves, certainly as members of the working class, we should not allow ourselves to think along the lines of the manner in which, the factional manner in which the ANC government has taught the media to think. We must not fool ourselves into thinking that because Zuma is gone and they've replaced Zuma with Ramaphosa, that things are going to improve. Under Jacob Zuma, when state capture was at its height, Ramaphosa was his deputy president. And we cannot allow ourselves to be misled about the role that he played. He was utterly embarrassing during the Zondo Commission hearings when he admitted to knowing about certain things, and he took a decision not to do anything for the sake of political expediency. Now, that tells you that our problem is not a Zuma problem or a Ramaphosa problem. Our problem is an ANC problem. And until we start to accept, as members of the working class, that this ANC government, from the time that it has been in power, has not been driving an agenda in our interest and for our benefit. I mean, all the signs are there. We can see it, right? They've been in power now
But
for 28
Phakamile,
years,
we
and yet
can't.
our lives have not transformed in a meaningful way for our benefit. So we must be very clear about the fact that the problem here is not Ramaphosa, the problem is the ANC.
Okay, so you admit the problem is not Ramaphosa, suggesting that obviously we can't have the ANC back in power in 2024 because clearly they're on a path of self-destruction. We saw it with, I mean, up till today, no one's been brought to book post the Zondo Commission. Zuma's gotten off scot-free. The looting continues. Every day is a new horror story. Is it not a situation of, and I'm not protecting, I'm not at all justifying Cyril Ramaphosa's position, but isn't it not a situation of cadre deployment, just trying not to keeping quiet about a lot of issues, because if he does, everything's just going to melt down completely. We know how corrupt the ANC is. And I'm kind of wondering if Cyril Ramaphosa was just absolutely powerless to do anything, because we know Zuma and the power he yields. Just look at the July insurrection. Every time I talk on the show, I'm always having to bring the July insurrection into play, suggesting just how powerful Zuma and his supporters are. So in a situation like that, you need to ask the question, who is in fact ruling the country? Yes, maybe Cyril Ramaphosa is just a figurehead, but then of course the finger is pointed directly at the ANC, and we as South Africans need to make a difference by voting, and voting the correct parties in, or possibly strong coalition governments.
I think
Coalition
first of
parties,
all,
I beg your pardon.
I think on the issue of the July unrest, it would be unfair. And I think it would not just be unfair, but I think we need to look at the July unrest a lot more holistically. Because if you consider where South Africa has been going over the last 20 years or more under the leadership of this ANC government, it has been very clear that we were due an unrest, and mind you, that's most likely still going to come in the near future. And when it does happen again, it will be worse than what we experienced last year. Because by virtue of the fact that we are the most unequal country in the world in post-apartheid South Africa, and we are swimming in poverty. I mean, the unemployment rate now is 46% and counting. That's the expanded definition of unemployment. Crime has skyrocketed. We shouldn't be surprised that the July unrest happened. It was bound to happen. NUMSA has been predicting for years that we were on the cusp of some kind of violent insurrectional unrest, which would have been brought about precisely as a result of the intensification of inequality and poverty, which are a result of ANC's disastrous macroeconomic policies. I mean, that's a fact. So we cannot say that the July unrest is because of Jacob Zuma. The July unrest is, again, indicative of the failure of ANC policies and their inability to transform the lives of the people. And this is something that the entire ANC leadership must own, including and especially President Ramaphosa, because he's the president in charge right now. He cannot continue to hide behind the weaknesses and the failings of Zuma. Let's not forget, Zuma was actually arrested. He went to jail. Where are the consequences
And
for
how he
this?
got
I
Phakamile,
mean,
and
no,
how
but
he
we have
got
to say
out
this.
of
Where are the consequences for the president who sits on a sofa filled with US dollars which were brought in illegally? That in and of
Okay,
itself is an expression of his true character.
all
So
right.
we cannot let him off the hook, and we cannot let the
Phakamile,
ANC government off the hook.
I agree with you regarding Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC. We need a new government in place. We need them to be accountable. We need our country to be rebuilt again. It is disgusting and disastrous what's happening around us. We should not have anyone go hungry to bed. But let's not forget that it's the Zumas of this world who started the rot. And theirs is sitting in Nkandla happily ever after. On that note, just hold that thought as well. And I also want to ask you, what is your ideal for a new government? Undoubtedly, a few days ago, we had the issue around Thabo Mbeki, Kgalema Motlanthe, and Jacob Zuma, who came out with a very scathing censure of Cyril Ramaphosa, forgetting the role they have played within the ANC and bringing us to where we are. That being as it may, do you not see that as laying the groundwork for the elective conference, and that's suggesting that Cyril Ramaphosa is not going to be serving another term as the as the top dog within the ANC structures. And I know I'm throwing a lot at you. Please park this. But being a journalist and the great journalist that you have been on 702, I know you can respond to that. All right, I do have a comment from a listener. Let's just respond to my couple of questions that I've thrown at you. Phakamile, please respond, and then I'll give you the questions from the listener.
Oh, all right. So, no, you have thrown quite a lot. I think, first of all, I want to just read you a quote from Lenin because it forms the basis of our analysis as a trade union. Vladimir Lenin once said, "People always have been the foolish victims of deception and self-deception in politics, and they always will be until they have learned to seek out the interests of some class or other behind all moral, religious, political, and social phrases, declarations, and promises." And effectively, what Vladimir Lenin is saying there is that as members of the working class, we cannot allow ourselves to be misled by slogans of politicians. We must always analyze what are their class interests. And when we look at the ANC government and the last 28 years or more of its rule in South Africa, and yes, you are correct to raise the hypocrisy of Thabo Mbeki and Kgalema Motlanthe and even Jacob Zuma himself for critiquing Ramaphosa. Every single one of them, from the time that they were given the power to lead this country, they did not drive an agenda for the working class. They drove an agenda for the benefit of capital. And we can see that based on the decisions that this government has made and the outcome of their economic policy for more than 20 years. Over the last 20 years, we've seen the 1% getting richer. In fact, post-COVID, those who were already making up the 1% doubled their wealth, whilst ordinary workers and their families suffered. I mean, today in South Africa, ordinary workers just cannot get through from one month to the other. And yet we've seen the political elite increasing in wealth. So it is very important that we must always surface their true class interests in order for us to understand who they really are and where their agendas lie. When you look at Ramaphosa, for example, and what has recently happened under his administration, we now know that this climate deal, which was signed in Glasgow, has actually nothing to do with the just transition and assisting us as South Africa to transition from being coal dependent to being to transitioning to renewable energy. In fact, what they have done, what Ramaphosa has done under this administration, is sell off what our endowments, which we have in coal, for the benefit of international banks and financial institutions, because 97% of that climate change deal is nothing except loans. Only in fact, they said less than 1% has been allocated to deal with the question of the social impact of the transition. And that already tells you what their true motive is. They don't give a damn about the fact that closing down these coal-fired power stations are going to result in more than 100,000 people in Mpumalanga suddenly finding themselves out of work, because there's a whole economy that exists as a result of its dependence on coal. And
okay,
violated the principles of just transition so that they can enrich themselves. Ramaphosa's brother-in-law is Mutsepe. Mutsepe got the bulk of the renewable energy contracts in the last round. So they're enriching themselves at our expense. And this is this narrative of the ANC for the last 28 years. They have gotten richer as members of the political elite, whilst the African working class is languishing in extreme poverty and suffering.
And you are very right when you say that there's an Arab Spring brewing in the background because people are and angry. Having educated people taken in by food parcels and a couple of election time and voting time comes around, people need to start thinking and we need to have the right leaders at grassroots levels to empower and educate the people how they ought to be voting, why they ought to be voting the way they do, so that they can get, they can get food in their stomachs and their lives can improve. And let me also share a statement from Sakumzi Tombeni, who's asking you, Phakamile, what is your opinion regarding the state-owned enterprises? I think you have responded to that, but let's just repeat that. What is your opinion regarding the state-owned enterprises to make functional like private entities? Because when you look here in public sectors, things are not functioning well. The likes of corruption, negligence, incompetence, nepotism, etc. I don't say I go with privatizations, no. So your thoughts, I think you have shared that, but please just re-emphasize it.
Oh, absolutely. And we agree with Comrade Sakumzi's sentiment because so they've already begun the process of privatizing Eskom. Not the actual entity itself, but privatizing energy generation. As they shut down coal-fired power stations, they replace those coal-fired power stations with privately owned renewable energy companies. And Eskom, earlier in this year, when they were making submissions to NUMSA, they confirmed that part of the reason why they are making a demand for an increase in the electricity rate, the April increase that we paid recently, was in part due to the fact that we must now subsidize and pay for these privately owned IPPs. And the IPPs have been on the grid now for at least since 2018. We have not seen a benefit of these IPPs, which are grossly expensive and are part of Eskom's cost burden. And yet we are being told that we should accept these costs. And what does this mean in a practical sense? Well, what it means is in a practical sense, as Comrade Sakumzi perfectly articulated in that post, is that if you are poor and if you are working class and you are struggling, this electricity that already you cannot afford is about to get even more expensive as this government allows the private sector to play a greater role in electricity generation. We've seen this already playing itself out in our public healthcare system, where the public healthcare facility has all but collapsed. We can't even say that we've got a public healthcare system in this country. If you go to a public hospital, you will be lucky if you do not die in that facility. And that's what they're doing with all our state-owned entities. We can expect a situation where if you want good service, you're going to pay a lot of money. But if you cannot afford, unfortunately, you'll be stuck with a collapsing entity that will be assisting you in your service. And that is what we're trying to fight against as a union.
Okay, we need to wrap up. Unfortunately, I could talk to you here all day long. We do need to talk some more. I want your views on what you believe is the solution regarding the leaders of the country going forward. What's going to be the ideal outcome and situation for South Africa as far as government is concerned? Let's leave that for next week or the week after. Lovely chatting with you.
Lovely chatting to you as well, Julie. Thank you so much for having me.
Go well. And coming up next is Dr. Anthony Turton looking at the deplorable situation of the beaches in Durban regarding the sewage issue. So please stay with us.